Hello, and welcome to what is going to be the book review portion of today's videos. Because, well, basically I'm going to do a Q&A when I get back, because I'm currently, as this video goes live, probably fighting my way through M25 traffic, driving home, driving to see you all. So, I decided to cover the time it's probably going to take me to get back with some book reviews. I know, it's so strange for brew ships to actually involve book reviews, but they are actually part of it, and I do try and include the book reviews. It's just, usually, you all come up with such really interesting questions, I forget the books to review that I was supposed to review. I have the nice, neat pile next to me, and then they're here, and then the questions are coming down there on that screen, and I just go, ooh, cool question, that gives me that idea, and then I follow it through, and then I forget about the fact that I'm supposed to be reviewing books. So, yes, I blame all you. Seriously, though, I think you're going to enjoy this one. We're going to start off with this book, which is Secret Projects of the Kriegsmarine, Unseen Designs of the Nazi Germany's Navy. And if you thought what they produced was actually bonkers, what they actually were considering is even more insane. And I say this as someone who is disturbingly familiar with some of the unseen projects of the Royal Navy, thanks to having a father and a grandfather who are both completely obsessed with them. There is the submarine Type 3 light torpedo boat carrier. Yeah, we all wanted that in our lives. There is, I mean, there is a hydrofoil sort of scenario. There is just, it's grouped into secret underwater weapons, piloted torpedoes and midget submarines, major surface vessels, smaller surface vessels, and landing wonder weapons. Now, I was going to do the landing wonder weapons, but honestly, it's the major surface vessels. I just have to talk about this. This is the battleships. Under the conditions previously imposed by the Versailles Treaty, the Navy of New Germany State was severely limited in the construction of fresh warships. Under the treaty, post-World War I Weimar Republic was forbidden any U-boats, and the total surface strength of any future German Navy was limited to 6 battleships of the obsolete Deutschland and Logren type, 6 light cruisers, 12 destroyers, and 12 torpedo boats. This final class, not to exceed 200 tons displacement, resulted almost immediately in motor torpedo boats, a type of craft not explicitly covered by the treaty terms. Subsequently, Reichsmarine experiments eventually yielded the lethally effective Schnellboot design. Yeah. I prefer dog boats, but yeah, I can understand the Schnellboots are pretty darn good. The first steps of the naval rearmament plan, conceived to put German air forces in a position to control the seas with the British Royal Navy, took place in great secrecy and often involved fictitious front companies located abroad. Don't take this the wrong way. I love books, and this is Nikio Sagatio and Alessio Sagatio are rating a great thing. But I am sorry. First point of contention: the German Navy was not building itself at the start off to fight the Royal Navy. The French Navy, yes, but they weren't considering fighting the Royal Navy in the 1920s and 30s. They weren't that stupid. It was only when you had their Plan Z and all these things come up that people started getting these ideas. German armament plans remained in a constant state of revision during the 1920s and 30s. That's not good. Okay, at a certain point, it's get off the pot and start cooking. Anyway, there is then a full study of the Z plan, which is frankly quite interesting, and I think I might actually at some point try and I might take this to Canada with me and go through it with Drak. But more interesting is these plans of the H battleships. 13 battleships and battlecruisers were planned as part of the Z plan, including those either already in service or under construction. The latter were listed in plan as Chief A, Deutschland and Lutzow, B, Admiral Scheer, C, Admiral Gras Bay, D, well, Deutschland is Den Lutzow, D, Scharnhorst, E, Gneisenau, F, Bismarck, and G, Tirpitz. Well, honestly, the Deutschlands are not battleships. We'll leave that to one side. Not pocket battleships, not battleships. They are heavy cruisers. They are heavy cruisers. And that's what the Germans refer to them as well. That's why they're called Panzerschiff armored ships, not battleships. Scharnhorsts are called battleships, and Bismarck and Tirpitz are. And then 6 new super battleships were to be built, essentially enlarged and improved successors to the already impressive Bismarck and Tirpitz. On what grounds are Bismarck and Tirpitz impressive? They have 8 15-inch guns. So did the Queen Elizabeth class. So did the R class. They're fast. Yeah, but so at that point, the King George V's. If we think about it, the entire reputation of the Bismarck and Tirpitz rests on the fact that Bismarck sinks Hood, a battle cruiser, with, and again I'm referring to the Drachenfell thesis, a very, very lucky shot. An unupgraded and refitted battle cruiser. And a 14-inch gun battleship, which is a new one, which has so many problems in it anyway, it should probably have not been there, doesn't fight, doesn't really sort of carry on. It's one of those classic scenarios where really you would, a more conservative admiral would have adopted a force of either this requires me to take my whole force there, or none of my force there. He went with the halfway option, which was never a good scenario. One can imagine the fight if, I don't know, King George V had been there as well as Prince Wales and Hood. And Victorious not that far away. That could have changed scenarios. The design, well, it was supposed to be displacing 62,500 tons. So an extra 12,500 tons, which, considering what happens on 50,000 tons with the Bismarck class, let's be honest, and the amount of inefficiencies baked into them, 12,500 tons to me doesn't sound like it's going to get any more efficient. That sounds like it's going to get worse. Considering that the best ships in this whole set, I would argue, were Scharnhorst and Gneisenau. Main armament consisted of 8 406mm guns. Wow, you're going up to 16-inch. Produced in left and right-handed pairs and mounted in 4 turrets. Secondary armament ranged from 12 155mm guns to 20 4 20mm and 6 533mm torpedoes in lateral tubes. 4 AR-196s were to be carried. Oh, good lord. In the book Hitler's Table Talk, this is a quote in this book, a series of Hitler's monologues and private conversations apparently transcribed for posterity, he appears to hint at potential names during June 1942 of what these ships would have been called. I think it is very astonishing that men like Ulrich von Herten and Guts von Belken should have been so far in advance of their times and so progressive in their ideas. It's a great pity that they had behind them in their struggle no strong and concrete doctrine, which would have given them necessary moral elan and perseverance. Their completely German outlook nevertheless entitles them to a high place in the esteem of the German people, and for this reason suggested that battleships or other large warships are present under construction should be named after them. I rejected the suggestions that a battleship should be named after myself, because if such a ship had bad luck, the superstitions would regard it as unfavorable omen for my own activities. Imagine a battleship named after me having to spend 6 months in dry dock for repairs. Look, for example, at the very harmful effect the announcement of the destruction of Fort Stalin at Sevastopol had on Russian morale. And honestly, it just gets worse. And I mean worse. There's a battlecruiser in here. Oh, and various operations on the Panzerschiff. The Panzerschiff ones actually get better. Honestly, the Panther Chief get better, but no. And then there's the aircraft carriers, and they just get worse. Oh, 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 yeah. This is a very good book to read. Yes, I disagree with the premise that they were building against the Royal Navy as early as this book seems to suggest, but it's very good to read. Just don't read it while eating; it will put you off your food. And if you have especially the bits about aircraft carriers, they are particularly disturbing. But it's a good read. Ugh, I'm now going to put it away. For a less disturbing read, this is cool. The 614th Tank Destroyer Battalion, and it's by Samuel Decourt, and it's basically, it's just cool. It does what Band of Brothers did for the Airborne, this does for the Tank Battalion. And if the Tank Destroyers get a movie or a television show, and it's not based on this book, then there is something seriously wrong in the world. The army units have such a turbulent history. A few army units have such a turbulent history as the 827th Tank Destroyer Battalion. They were the only segregated battalion that served in combat with self-propelled tank destroyers. It entered the line in December 1944 and was pulled from it in February, being used for other assignments until the end of the war in Europe. The 827th Tank Destroyer Battalion was activated on 20th April 1942 at Camp Forest, Tennessee. The original cadre consisted of men from the 4th Cavalry Brigade and additional soldiers from other camps in America. The original unit was intended as a self-propelled battalion equipped with M3s. The battalion was changed to a towed unit on 4th June 1943, thus deactivating the reconnaissance company, and changed to the self-propelled tank destroyer company on the battalion on the 13th of July 1943, establishing the reconnaissance company once more. The men were equipped with M10s, but the unit was converted to the M18 Hellcat before going into battle. Seriously, that's an entire episode just on what happened to them in a 3-month period. Just as the equipment was changed, so too changed the commanding officers of the unit. Captain Francis McCain Oliver was the commanding officer at the Inception Unit, but he was replaced by Lieutenant Colonel Frederick Ryder on 13th May 1942. After attending Command and General Staff School, Major Oliver returned in August 1942. He was soon replaced by Major John W. Darrah, who assumed command on 25th of September 1942. He was eventually replaced by Lieutenant Colonel George Hudson on 29th of July 1943. Curious enough, Hudson turns up a couple of weeks after they've decided to go back to a self-propelled tank destroyer battalion. Lieutenant Joseph Orchard, who served under Hudson, remembered him as ill-suited for the task. Hudson openly stated that he hated Jews and would order him and the other officers out of their beds in the middle of the night to play craps with him. The same commander would have falsified the ratings of the black officers to dismiss them from his service. Orchard took action to prevent this, and instead the officer was dismissed. After serving with the 827th, Orchard was moved to the 372nd Infantry Regiment and later the 614th Tank Destroyer Battalion. Hudson was relieved a month later by Lieutenant Colonel Herschel D. Baker, 25th of August 1943. Baker stayed in command for almost a year when he was replaced on 5th of August 1944 by Lieutenant Colonel Philip J. Vandersweep, who would command the 827th throughout its short combat history. Third Platoon, C Company, 614th Tank Destroyer Battalion, was the first Black Army unit to win the Distinguished Unit Citation during the Second World War. One of the 3 segregated Tank Destroyer Battalions that fought in combat. What this book reminds me of is that if you set out stereotypes for guiding your grouping of humanity, you automatically set yourself up to fail. The biggest and most stupid thing that people did who wanted these units especially to fail, and the US Army did, was they made them so selective and hard to get into. because that meant that you were automatically creaming off the very best of the best. And when you have a unit which automatically has the very best of the best of any group in it, they are going to hold themselves to an impossibly high standard, and they're going to achieve amazing things. Mainly out of service, but also partially motivated for taking the sort of people who make that scenario and make it that way, and basically spitting them in the eye in the best way you can. Armoured Warfare in the British Army, 1914 to 1939, by Dick Taylor. Forward by David Willey, who is, of course, the curator of the Bovington Tank Museum, and one of the most interesting people on YouTube. Now, honestly, what I consider this book is an example of how British armoured warfare goes downhill the moment the Royal Navy hands it over to the Army. I mean, seriously, the Army just can't handle technological development. It's just terrible. Joke. But I bet that gets sampled for a short at some point by someone. Anyway, it's really kind of interesting how they have to develop themselves and what they're developing. And there are some tank ideas which are just patently absolutely insane. But also, you realize that the pace of development just goes like this. And it always does. And this book is a classic example. There is no one section you can really read out that illustrates it. But there is a point, and I will read this page in a second for a different reason, that you can say. We often believe that the pace of technology is always fastest in our own period, and there is a reason for that. To get to a pinnacle, you have to fill in the pyramid. And so every layer of technology builds up on the layer beyond, below it. But technology is really an inverted pyramid. So it's like that, rather than like that. So we get all this technological growth happening because once you've got through these layers, you're automatically opening up a wider amount of technology you can get to. And you also make possible ideas which were thought of earlier and come up. So the most important thing for development of tanks is the reliability of engines. Okay? And the horsepower in that area. So actually, the really interesting and cool thing you can think about is the horsepower per ton generation race, which goes on in aircraft and developing planes, and planes being the most critical, being where the engine horsepower is the most critical thing that decides their performance in most of the 1920s and 30s, also makes tanks get more and more viable and more efficient because the technologies cross-bleed across. And that's cool. Whatever the weapons which are given to the 4th Hussars, the regiment will play the same tune on them and will carry the same old traditions. Whether it be a sabre and the wheel into line for the charge, whether it is the mounted infantry, as rifle-armed cavalry, or as you are now, a mechanized unit. Wisely, he refrained from mentioning his previous intentions to reduce the cavalry by 2/3, or his support for large cuts in the army budget. This, of course, comes from the lovely Winston Leonard Spencer Churchill MP during the 1920s. By the start of the war in September 1939, all but 2 regiments of the Line Cavalry, plus the 2 Hauser regiments, had at least started the process of conversion, with some of them complete, but only just. Whilst not officially labelled as such, the sequence of mechanization of the Line Cavalry can, in retrospect, be divided up into 5 distinct phases as follows. Phase 1, 2 regiments. The 1st, Light Horse, and the 11th, Household, and the 12th, Light. Phase 2, 8 regiments. KDG, 3rd H, 4th H, 8H, 10th H as motorised cavalry, Bays, 7th Household, and the Naval as the light tank regiments. And then it goes on, the 8, in Phase 3, the 8 1922 amalgamated regiments, Phase 4, the Royals, and Phase 5, 1942, the Greys. It's interesting to see how units become armoured and what they get. It's interesting to look at them, and there's some great tables in here. And I mean, if you're interested in following the history and development of armoured warfare, and that's showing up really badly in light, there you go. This is what you want to read. This will give you a wonderful history. And yeah, where is my Armoured Division book? I have an Armoured Division book here somewhere. Armoured Division, British Armoured Divisions. No, that's the Tank Destroyers book. Armoured Divisions. I have a book called Armoured Divisions of the British Army. And you combine those two together and you will have an excellent. Has anyone nicked this out? If someone's nicked my book, I'll be so annoyed with them. There again, it won't be unusual. No, it's not that. So I presume it's been borrowed. This is what happens when you explain to your sister that your mechanical engineering books can be used to teach the mechanical engineering students. And your mother just decides to nick your books. Anyway, very good book. Worth it. Rather appropriate, the Endurance. Shackleton's legendary Antarctic expedition by Caroline Alexander. So, of course, it's excellent. Alexander's the name. There's no debate about that at the moment. That's always a stamp of good quality. Really good pictures. Really interesting stuff. And it's just worth reading. I'd say this. It will sound strange when you say this, but the chapter I really liked is this one. To my comrades, so on the deep and open sea I set, forth and with a single ship, than that small band of comrades that have never left me. That's Dante, Voyage of the Ulysses. Tell me, when was the war over? Shackleton had asked Sorrel on arriving at the Stromness station after the crossing South Georgia. The war's not over, Sorrel replied. Millions are being killed. Europe is mad. The world is mad. During their ordeal on the ice, the war had been a frequent topic of conversation, with the men chiefly concerned that they would miss it entirely by the time they got home. Before boarding the Telco, Shackleton had taken pains to collect mail that had been waiting for the men at Georgia, as well as newspapers, to give them some idea of what they had missed in the nearly 2 years they'd been out of touch with the world. Opinions had changed on all sorts of subjects, Lee's report Shackleton as telling them on the Telco. They call it the Roll of Honour now instead of the casualty list. The reader may not realise quite how difficult it was for us to envisage nearly 2 years of the most stupendous war of history, wrote Shackleton in his own book Self. The locking of the armies in the trenches, the sinking of the Lusitania, the murder of Nurse Cavell, the use of poison gas and liquid fire, the submarine warfare, the Gallipoli campaign, the hundreds of other incidents of the war almost stunned us at first. I suppose our experience was unique. No other civilized men could have been as blankly ignorant of the world-shaking happenings as we were when we reached Stromness whaling station. The war had changed everything, and most of all, the heroic ideal. With millions of Europe's young men dead, Britain was not particularly interested in survival stories. The news of the Endurance expedition was so extraordinary that it could not fail to fill popular headlines, but Shackleton's official reception was markedly cool. Facetiously describing his arrival in Stanley in the Falklands after the failure of Southern Rescue to the paper John Bull gave this account. Not a soul in Stanley seems to care one scrap about his arrival. Not a single flag was flown, and old Cape remarked, he ought to have been at war long ago instead of messing about on icebergs. In Punta Arenas, Shackleton and his men received an almost riotous welcome. with the town's various nationalities, including the Germans, with whom Britain was at war, pouring out with bands and flags to greet them. Shackleton had cannily stopped off in Rio Seco, some 6 miles away, to alert Punterius by telephone as their arrival. The Foreign Office was quick to see publicity value in his popularity and encouraged Shackleton to call upon those governments that had come to his assistance, and so with a handful of men he went to Santiago, Buenos Aires, and Montevideo. More importantly, he made no visit to paid no visit to the British Falklands. The Endurance Expedition ended on October 8th, 1916 in Buenos Aires, but Shackleton still had work to do. The other half of the Imperial Trans-Antarctic Expedition, the Ross Sea Depot laying party on the opposite side of the globe, had gone adrift. Literally, the expedition's ship Aurora had come untethered from her mooring and then been prevented from returning to port by the pack ice. Another saga of survival, involving one of the most formidable feats of man-hauling sledging in Antarctic exploration, had unfolded on ice when Shackleton had first won renown as a polar explorer. 3 lives had been lost. Shackleton was therefore bound back to Antarctica to pick up the piece of the expedition. At Buenos Aires railway station, Shackleton said goodbye to his men who had come to see him off. It was the last time so many men as the expedition, all but Blackborough and Hudson, would be gathered together. "We have properly broken up," Macklin wrote. "With few exceptions. Most were on their way back to Britain. Blackborough was in the hospital in Punta Arenas and was the object of doting attention from the city's female population. Bakewell was staying on. When I joined the expedition, I asked that I might be paid off at Buenos Aires on the return," wrote Bakewell. "Sir Ernest consented to my wish, and now I was at the party on the way it has ever been my good fortune to be with." It is a good book and a really interesting read. Running the Gauntlet. Cargo liners under fire 1939 to 1945, Bernard Edwards. Now, a few weeks ago, months ago actually, I had some interesting conversations with someone who kept commenting about the losses of liners and escorting and all those things. And I listened to them, but I know what I know from the evidence I've read, and they know what they know from the evidence they've read, and it was a case of the two sides were never really going to come together because our perspectives on it were very different, based on drawing actually not from that much dissimilar information, but mine was from the naval side, theirs was from the casualty side. And the thing is, the majority were getting through. Yes, the casualties were endless, but all the ones that didn't, but the majority were getting through. It's a rather nasty thing when you start thinking like a historian. You get very Excel spreadsheet-ish. This book, well, puts human perspective on that. And still, a lot of ships get through. And there's this example, which is before crossing the equator, the Grass Bay made a rendezvous with the supply ship Altmark in a remote spot south of the Canary Islands. 11,000-ton Altmark was one of 5 tankers built to supply German surface raiders. Commissioned in Kiel in 1939 under command of Captain Heinrich Dahl, she was a twin-screw motor vessel powered by 4 9-cylinder man diesels, which gave her a top speed of 21 knots and a range of 12,500 miles at 15 knots. She was manned by naval personnel and equipped with 3 5.9-inch and 2 1.5-inch guns, plus 4 20mm air cannon and 8 machine guns. A formidable array of weaponry for a supposedly non-combatant ship. In her tanks, the Altmark carried some 13,000 tons of diesel oil, while her cargo hold was packed with ammunition, spare parts, and food, everything required to keep Grass Bay at sea without the need to seek out a friendly port. It's quite interesting when you start reading, you start looking at the ships, and it describes some of the German ones, it describes some of the British ones, it describes, for me, some of the experiences which are not too dissimilar to how some of my uncles were lost in World War II. One of my uncles, he was Fleet Air Arm. In fact, 3 of them were Fleet Air Arm. They were lost in World War II. All 3. And one of those was lost manning the deck gun on a merchant ship as it went down and being attacked by a surface raider. And they were trying to evacuate the ship, and the gun's crew were wiped out. And he and his best friend are last reported as manning the gun. And we had no idea what happened to them until a few years after the World War II. My grandma received a letter via the Red Cross from India. Turned out his body had washed up, and their family there had found him and had buried him with as much honours as they could, because they presumed, because of his wounds and the fact get there, he deserved it. So he is buried somewhere. I'm not quite sure because the letter's been sort of lost in moving of houses and between the various generations, but somewhere on presumably the west coast of India, there is a grave made out to a Fleet Air Arm lieutenant called Gosling. Surname Gosling. But no, it's reading these stories has been a pretty interesting time, and it actually gave me some more information about my uncle's ship, my great uncle's ship. Yeah, great uncle. He was my grandma's brother. It's a good story. I gave the example of the Battle of the River Plate Altmark example from the Grass Bay because, well, that showed the quality of the writing. But also, I didn't want to get into too many of the stories and reveal them all. It's something which Bernard Edwards does a very good job, and I recommend reading it. And the fact is, cargo liners are a sort of special ship. There are ocean liners and there are cargo liners, and cargo liners get forgotten, but they were ships doing a vast majority of the runs around the world, and they really did matter. They're not as sexy, so they don't get the same attention, but they do deserve it. This book came. Was sent by a very nice gentleman from Australia. Well, a copy was sent for me and a copy was sent for Drac. And it's Cable Beyond Our Dreams, Australia's Bathurst-class corvettes, 1940 to 1960, by John Henshaw. It's cool. It's really cool. It's got all the class histories. It's got all sorts of details in them, and it's got these beautiful plans. And if you were a modeler, this is a sort of book which, if you got, you would be so happy with. I mean, it's got pictures, paintings, everything in here. Background details, the little stuff about the radars and all that stuff is just cool. It's a really cool, and it's really well written. HMS Bathurst. No detailed drawing was available for Bathurst or her sister ships, Lismore and Maryborough. However, the differences between these three and the 57 that followed them were essentially related to the superstructure. The free-level bridge with an open-topped bridge above a wheelhouse and chart room may have been a deliberate design requirement with each of these ships envisaged as flotilla leaders. The better command facilities offered with a higher and open bridge, perhaps being seen as an advantage. Oh, no thanks to me. Yeah. I prefer not to have an open-top bridge, thank you very much. It does allow you better view around, I do admit that, and honestly, in World War II, they liked them because they were still getting used to using radar. Post-radar world, it's far nicer. Again, evolution of the armament, what guns they're fitted with. And it's got all the histories. So, Benella. Although nominally a minesweeper, Benella was fitted during construction for survey duties and did not carry minesweeping gear. The forecastle desk was extended to accommodate a large chart room. Each motorboats were fitted with the existing Extra motorboats were fitted, and the existing motor cutter was replaced with a high-performance cabin clinker tilt type, presumably the 25-foot standard version. Figma refers to survey motorboats and having bigger davits. The maximum complement was 107. Occasionally, if her program permitted, Benella combined convoy escort duty with passage to another operating area. Early in 1943, the officer in charge, her graphic branch, was delegated to the Charting Authority for Allied Naval Forces in the South Pacific, and Task Group 70.5, a unit under the US 7th Fleet, was formed. In 19th May 1943, Benella departed Melbourne for Sydney. After completion of trials, she was assigned to duty in northern areas. It's funny to think, but oceanography matters. Charting matters. We don't think of it as a military operation. We don't think of it as a critical warfighting role, but it still is very much there and still very much matters. And this is the life that they are talking about. What is really nice is having a book talk so openly about this, talk about the importance of oceanography, talk about these ships, which are fighting ships being used for what is normally regarded as not a fighting role, but is actually a very critical role. If you don't have accurate charts, you don't know where you can put your ships. That sounds facetious, but let's put it this way. If you chart a bay which you're going to use as a harbour or a facility to do operations, maintenance on your ships, you need to know what the bay, what it's like, before you can bring in a floating dry dock, before you can park merchant ships. Where can you park them? What kind of draft do you have? All these things matter. You can't just sail a boat in and hope it works. So the very pragmatic part of logistics is surveying. It's the same as with roads, with every scenario. If you do not survey, you do not have the information. If you don't have the information, you can't do. That's it. So it becomes a very warlike role. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed these 6 books. So it's not really sort of 4 random books or a book or 2 to review. It's 6 books in roughly 40 minutes. And I hope it's given you some sort of interest. And if you have more questions about them, I will have them next to me when I'm doing a live, and I will answer them, hopefully, if I can find the right page numbers again. Thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed. And as ever, thank you for all your support. Thank you for everything you all do for me. Thank you for the super chats. Thank you for the people who donated to the Haida trip. Thank you for the people who've bought my own book and are still buying my own book, hopefully. You know, that matters. Trust me, you know, it's getting the royalty check. And the reason, as I've said in other videos, I wanted to spend £200 a maximum on getting the camera for the Haida trip was I wanted to buy it with the royalty check, which I'd got through. That's not going to be possible, as I'm probably going to need to put more money in for that, but I'll work that one out. Thank you very much. Thank you again for all your support, and thank you. Take care.